What's wrong with the Beta Cross Trainer suspension? Nothing. It's made by Olle, a Spanish company with a long history in trial suspension. So the Cross Trainer suspension has a strong trials influence in terms of its spring weight, valving and lightweight design. And of course it costs less. It's a large part of why the Cross Trainer runs at around $1,000 cheaper than the RR300. Of course, many enduro riders love the light weight, but they want the bike to handle faster, aggressive riding too. So they start complaining about the Cross Trainer's suspension. It's a similar issue the KTM Freeride has faced over the years. Everyone loves a chart. Here's one we cooked up earlier. If you aren't too heavy, the stock setup is great for slow, technical riding and trials type tricks. And Trevor Campbell even gave the Cross Trainer a belt around the motocross track and was surprised the stock suspenders weren't too bad. Not great, of course, but not hopeless. And Ben Hemingway rode a stock Cross Trainer to 8th place against the world's best in Hell's Gate, the Italian extreme enduro. So the problem is many of us are over the 80 kilogram weight they design most dirt bikes for, and we want to ride the Cross Trainer faster than its intended purpose. So let's look at some options. The easy budget approach: drain the standard 5-weight fork oil and refill with 15-weight fork oil. On the rear, you can ramp up the rear damping enough for everyday riding, but our FFRC suspension guru recommended not maxing out the compression damping, as you could wind up damaging the piston on really big hits. And if you don't need stiffer springs, this will only cost you $15. It's a cheap fix, which some riders find acceptable. Can you afford more than $15 in fork oil? Next is playing with the shims in the forks. If you Google around, you'll find various suggestions, but Dirt Punk's suggestions here are typical. Plenty of riders are reasonably happy with this heavier fork oil option and shims, but there's still the inevitable trade-off with losing that plush feel as you beef things up to cope with faster riding. To experiment with this, the FFRC gurus did a basic revalve on my Cross Trainer forks. Was it better? For faster riding, yes, but it was losing that supple feel for slower riding, and could actually be downright jarring on small, rapid bumps. I was puzzled, as normally FFRC can work magic with any suspension setup, but they explained that revalving won't overcome a critical issue. More on that later. Okay, ready to spend some money? Beta have the BPS K9 cartridge kit. I've read some reviews, quite a few riders like this solution. And I rode a bike set up like this, and I did find the Cross Trainer felt a lot more controllable at speed. It was working much better on big hits and jumps. But as with previous options, there was still a trade-off with losing that plush feel over small bumps, and not being able to weight and de-weight the bike over obstacles as well. There are other cartridge kits like the Andreani X-Trainer Fork cartridge kit, but shit, at 1,000 Australian dollars or around 800 US, I reckon that's getting awful expensive. It's bringing the Cross Trainer up to the same cost as a RR300 before you even look at the rear shock. So what about revalving the rear shock? To experiment with this, FFRC did a basic revalve on the shock, and surprise, surprise, I didn't notice much improvement again. Now we'll find out why. FFRC use their dyno to work out precisely when and where suspension isn't doing what the rider wants it to. And James, the head suspension tuner, quickly spotted that the relationship between compression and damping were very similar, as they normally are in trial suspension. However, an enduro setup always has much more compression damping than rebound, and the dyno charts revealed the existing suspension mods can only get around this issue to a certain extent. So on the rear shock they designed a custom piston to get the right balance with the damping, and then modified the stock fork internals along with different shim stacks for the same reason. They told me what they were doing to the forks and it sounded so radical I just hoped the forks still worked afterwards. But James has been designing custom motorbike, rally and V8 supercar suspension components for 13 years, so I just hoped he knew what he was doing. The benchmark? Well, to match the Sark's suspension on the Beta RR range. Despite initial problems a few years back, the current Sark's forks and shock are excellent. So to match that with the lighter, cheaper Olle suspension from the Cross Trainer is a tall order. The result? Awesome. At both ends, that original supple feel is back in spades. And yet the bike feels so much better with aggressive riding as well. Does it feel as good as a RR300? Well, almost, which is a huge achievement. At low speed, every bit as good. On big hits, it's almost the same, but I suspect it's more than inch less suspension travel on the Cross Trainer is making a slight difference. On our last ride, the other two were riding RR300s. We all swapped over and they agreed on the suspension. Particularly my brother, who has ridden the Cross Trainer with the previous suspension mods and said, "Man, it's not trying to kill me anymore." So apparently now my setup is almost identical to the one they did for Ben Grabham's Cross Trainer when he came 8th in Australia's hard enduro, Wildwood Rock. They modified the cartridge kit he was using to get the same feel. Apparently Ben loved it and didn't even adjust the compression damping that came with the cartridge kit. So is there an ultimate suspension setup for the Cross Trainer? For me, this would now have to be close. Sure, you could adapt suspension from another bike or get aftermarket forks and shock, maybe rob a bank and get Ollen's custom gear done. But it will cost a fortune and just make the Cross Trainer heavier. But as always, don't take my word for it, do your own research, see what others say. Oh, and one final tip from the FFRC guys, they usually recommend get your suspension serviced every 50 hours, although of course many of us leave it much longer than that. They did say it's more important to observe this with the Cross Trainer. The Olle suspension is lightweight, you just want to be a bit more diligent with your servicing. Mine looked fine at 40 hours, but then I ride like a pussy. If you are riding your Cross Trainer hard, make sure you get it serviced around the 50-hour mark to play it safe. Ciao, ciao.